Josh Ritter. Josh, thanks for being on. Let's talk about this request from the defense to have Lori Vallow Daybell sit out some sensitive parts of this case. What would that signal to the jury if she was able to step out? And is this a hard and fast rule where judges would require the defendant to be there the entirety?
It's not a completely hard and fast rule, but it nearly is. And the judge made the absolute right decision by denying her request. She has a due process right to be present in court for every piece of testimony. And the judge is actually protecting her rights by denying her request here. The judge wants to make sure we don't do this again. We don't want to sit through another one of these trials again. So he wants to make sure that this sticks on appeal and there isn't some issue like her not being present during very important pieces of testimony to bring up on appeal. And you're right to point out that the jurors would notice it and it would become a distraction and would become something that they're talking about rather than listening to and talking about the testimony that they're hearing on the stand. And so for that distraction, he doesn't want to turn the court into a theater. And for her due process rights, I think it was the right thing to do to deny this request.
Josh, real quick, do you think that it would actually make the jury think that she's being sympathetic, that she cares enough to not be there because it's too difficult for her? Or would they be a bit off put by her not being present for this all-important murder trial?
I think it could go either way. They could probably look at it and see, wow, she's not present because we're talking about this very emotional testimony about the recovery of her children, about the condition of their bodies, and wow, she really couldn't handle it. And then they begin to spiral with that, and they begin to talk about that in the deliberation room. Does that mean that she was really bothered by this, and maybe she had nothing to do with it? Again, none of that is really evidence that they should be considering. Or you're right, the other way they could look at it is, wow, she doesn't even care to be here during her own trial, and that could have an effect on her own defense. So for all those reasons, you don't want that to be a distraction. It's important to keep her in court.
Kudos to the judge for moving ahead in the way that keeps her and protects this case on appeal. Let's talk about Zulema Pasanis, who is still on the stand right now under cross-examination. You know, her connection to this case is not only being a follower of Chad Daybell, but she was also paired together with Alex Cox, Lori Vallow Daybell's brother, who is deceased. Let's take a listen to some more of that testimony that centers around Alex, this defendant who is not in the courtroom.
And what was Alex's gift or responsibility?
He was a warrior.
Okay. And a warrior for what?
Chad had told him that he was going to be a warrior, a defender, and he was going to be training many other warriors that were going to be moving to Rexburg in the future.
Okay. And when you say a warrior defender, a defender of who?
Well, at that time, Chad had told Alex that he had come only once to this earth, and the sole purpose for him coming to this earth was so that he could be Lori's protector and defender.
Okay. Did Alex believe this?
Absolutely.
Beliefs are such a huge part of this case, figuring out who believed what and how it impacted their decision to carry out these crimes, according to the prosecution. Josh, what do you do if you're the prosecutor and you want to be sure that this jury doesn't get distracted by the absence of Alex Cox, not only as the scapegoat, or as he called himself, the fall guy for all of this, but also the idea that you have someone who is a follower and believed this and did things according to what Chad Daybell said about him. Is he in the same boat with Lori of just being someone who is following what is being spoken over him?
Yeah, I think that's why this testimony that we're hearing right now was so important, because it really is kind of an insider view as to this cult, how the control that Chad Daybell had over this cult, how much they believed it, how they believed they were warriors, this kind of role they played in this grand scheme of the end of days. And it's important for the jurors to understand that, because it's a large part of this case. It's the landscape of why these murders took place, and so it's important for them to understand that, and to some extent try to get inside the mind of Lori Vallow and why she would participate in this type of a gruesome murder. But you're right; the prosecution needs to keep the jurors' eyes focused on the defendant in court. Not possible suspects out of court, not her husband who's going to be on trial at a later date, but the person who's sitting there in court at this time, and help them to realize that those other people are distractions. They need to be focused on Lori Vallow's role, and what role did she play in these horrible murders.